Happy Hearts Day, everyone. Happy Hearts Month, Rose.
Yeah, happy
Welcome to the At the Core. This is another episode of this podcast, and we would like to be going at the core of love within the field or discipline of psychology,
Okay.
looking at how love is positioned, how love is contextualized, embedded in what we do as psychologists, whether that is doing mental health services or work within industries or organizations with people who are struggling or suffering from depression and anxiety and other mental health illnesses. Let's go straight at the core of love in psychology. This is Robby Echavez, your host for this program. I'm joined by my great friend
Wow.
Rose Velasco. There you go. I'm not sure if you would remember, Rose. I'm not sure if you'd remember this.
Wow.
Would you remember this?
I don't know, when was that? I think that's the first.
You had us choose from a bundle of cut out hearts.
Yeah.
So many years back.
In one of our activities.
That's right.
Yeah.
I remember that we were, for that activity, also talking about different kinds and different forms of love.
Yes.
In your experience, Rose, how do you think talking more about love in the workplace, more about love in the groups that you're with, more about love in the community, more about love with students or learners or those with mental health conditions, how do you think that changes or enriches psychology if it does that?
In that way, like for instance, in the field of work where I'm busy about lately, it's like when there are like employees having concerns about depression, the only thing that I can do is provide them the space, listen to them, basically listen to them, because something to do with like what's wrong with how they feel. They only like needed a certain space with my presence. I think that will soothe them enough, because after which the next time we're gonna be meeting, performance is like doing great. There's no more absenteeism, something like that, and something to do with giving compliments with others. That's it.
So these acts of love, these behaviors that we show, they change a person in terms of, well, before the change in performance, before the increase or the improvement of performance, we've heard about how these acts or behaviors of love might change a person's mood, that it might change a person's way of looking
at
at
perception.
things, a person's outlook
Yeah,
of
exactly.
how his or her life is. I wonder if you can give examples of what these acts of love are. When we talk behavior or speak behavior, how does love speak through our behaviors? What can an HR practitioner, what can a mental health worker do or say to someone to show that love? How is that displayed?
For instance, when a certain employee sought help in a way of like being present in my office, usually what I do is like, aside from listening, because listening is very important in my field of work in human resources, because when I listen, I observe transformation of behavior, because prior to getting inside my office, they have this preconditioned something like thinking that HR office is like, when you go there, it's like a bit of discipline. But when you, after going there, it's like you receive memorandum, you will receive NTEs, you will receive termination for that matter. But providing them the behavior of listening, then this transformation of behavior.
Right. This is another act of love. In fact, I often quote mm, de Chalton, who says that the first act of love is to listen. Listening is the first step of loving. And you mentioned that this act of listening becomes an important way of seeing those outcomes.
Yes.
In the place of the work, when we listen better to employees, when we listen better to our coworkers, we're not only shooting for improved performance,
Yes.
but we're also changing the way they see themselves and they see the world and the way they feel
Yes.
about other people,
Mhm.
about their supervisors, about their
Colleagues.
colleagues. In this cutout heart that you had us choose from, I picked one that says something from Mohandas K. Gandhi, and I'll read it for everyone. It says, "Love never claims; it ever gives."
Yeah.
Mm. There is that gift you talked about, giving our ear,
Yeah.
giving the ears of our heart to listen. What are other gives of love? What does love ever give, according to Gandhi, that in your experience has changed people? You've talked about employees. Why don't we speak about the people you're with in different groups?
Different group.
Rose here is very active in terms of volunteering her time to communities of people, very diverse ones too. Can you tell us, remembering any of those interactions, any of those encounters, what sort of loving you think have changed people in these group activities?
Number one, the one thing I noticed is that if they are provided with good compliments, for instance, one of the participants went to me and said, "Hey, miss, look at this, it's very beautiful." When I told her, "Oh, that's great, that's amazing work of art, and this work of art manifests your being unique," that particular participant, after hearing that compliment coming from me, the face really was like very, very, very light. And then there was that emotion wherein the participant was lifted by showing of her like jumping and clapping, Probably that's the first time that she ever heard of a compliment like, "Amazing, you're a good artist, and this one is you. Your art is you." That can be one or two.
There's listening, and then there's affirmation.
Affirmation.
Right.
Yeah.
Giving people compliments is an act of love too. Just as powerful as listening to someone.
Yes.
Let's get more personal, Rose, and bring this down to the level of family and intimate relationships. Those who are girlfriends or boyfriends to each other, those who are partners to each other, and parents, of course, with their children. You talked about listening in the workplace. You talked about the power of affirmation as an act of love when we are with different communities who are dealing with their own difficulties, dealing with their own problems. What about families and romantic or intimate partners? In your experience, you also have a family of your own. You have people you call family, part of a home. Listening and affirmation, I'm sure also happens in your family.
Exactly.
Are there other acts of love that you've experienced to be powerful? Rose here, by the way, dances. Every time she gets the chance to do that. She dances in the rain, she dances under the sun.
The trees,
right,
the dogs.
Right. She takes flowers and leaves and she just has... Right. I wonder whether that is also an act of love. What does that teach everyone about the place of love in family life and in romantic relationships?
Yeah, in family life and in romantic relationship. Of course, being able to express myself through dancing, then my family would feel the same vibration of happiness. when they see me so bubbly dancing, it means we are surrounded by love. Although I know for sure it's just momentary because there are a lot of concerns that a family or a relationship, the partners are experiencing in that very moment. But in my experience, I wanted to like, how do you call this, be distracted from the monotonous life that I am having. So being with the family sometimes, I am not guilty about saying this, that there are instances wherein I feel so stressed out, even with the family. But one thing that I will do is like dancing with them, then forget about something in that very moment. For me, that's positive distraction in a way.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a lot of energy, isn't there? A lot of excitement that comes up and surfaces when acts of love, such as dancing, celebrating with the family, just having a meal together, happens in the context of these relationships. You talked about a number of outcomes from the work. Rose was telling us about improved productivity. Improved output in terms of when we listen to our employees, that can translate into better performance at work. In communities or among people who might be suffering from mental health difficulties, complimenting and affirming them can have positive effects in terms of their mood, in terms of the way they're feeling,
the way they behave in a way in the end.
Their personal outlook, the way they behave. And now, just a few seconds back, the positive outcomes when love is shown either through dancing or these small celebrations in the family, that produces a lot of energy. You were saying. I wonder how we can contextualize this, especially when we listen to that classic song that goes, "All you need is love. All you need is love," right?
Love, love.
And that song seems to be telling us that that's all we need. Love is all we need to be curing depression. Love is all we need to be curing anxiety and solving problems.
Even fixing a family too, right?
Are you a believer of that? Do you feel that love is all that matters? That all we need is love in attending to these very difficult psychosocial difficulties?
Yeah, it's true. I think the song is really like the conclusion of everything. That's for me, because I'm a believer that I am love. I'm provided with love. It's up to me if my perception change in that particular instance. But I have to go back to love. When we actualize that all we need is love, then we behave like love. But because of some constraints outside, so we get to be stressed over a lot of things. In my case, I have to be reminded that I am love.
Right. The reminder that we are love empowers your belief that it is indeed something that we all need. You were saying in the final analysis, in the conclusion of things, there might be other things that we might need in order to approach healing, in order to change mindsets or address difficult psychosocial problems. But in the final analysis and in conclusion, love is the end point. How do we get there, Rose? When you were saying that we might need a lot of other things to get to this end point of, seeing a loving family or seeing a loving and more caring community, seeing a more amiable, very person-centered workplace. These other factors that you speak about that supports love, what are they? Can you name a few things that might help people love better?
Basically, one thing in my experience is something to do with the environment. I am with, of course. Another is, of course, your friends will also contribute that, leading to loving. Aside from that, you need to also like read a lot. Reading is really helpful for me because sometimes when I miss something, when I mess up with my life, I have to find a book. And I will find that as, in a way, helping me, leading to love. And another thing is, of course, I go back to myself. I listen to myself. When I need something, I have to go back to myself because nobody can feel for me. That's my reality, and I cannot ask everyone or anyone to like represent for myself to feel such like whatever that feeling is, but specifically on love. I have to go back to myself.
Right. These are three things you mentioned. There's friends or social support, if we
That's
can
necessary.
extend that. If we can extend that to other people. But definitely other people, right? Including friends and family. Then there's reading.
Yeah.
A lot of self-nourishment, really, by taking in new material, learning about new things. And then thirdly, there's coming back to the self. Coming back to the self. Let's try to dissect that just a bit more and get at the core of that. When you speak about social supports, definitely not everyone's got them. It would be an ideal thing, I suppose, if everyone had good friends, everyone had wonderful families. But the reality is, a lot of people are struggling just to find themselves to be belonging to a supportive group of friends or community. How do you know you're in the right track? How do you know this is the right group for me, and this group or these individuals will help me nurture or nourish my loving for myself and others? What do you look for personally in your experiences? You go with a lot of people. You listen to a lot of people, very different kinds. How do you know you're in the right track? How do you know this is the group for me? I need to be connecting with these people because I know they will make me a more loving person.
Number one, I listen to my feeling in the here and now. If I feel that this particular group is the group which I need much support from, then I go there and I trust my first insight. For instance, I have this kind of problem, and then I saw a friend during that time, and then I asked her, "Where do you go?" And then I followed her, and then that's the group that I had. One thing we had when I inquired where she's going, one thing is that we have common interests. So that group becomes my group for that particular instance. It is not the what's this constant group. It's not the permanent group, but that's the group that I pick for that instance, for that particular concern that I am feeling.
Right. Intuition is your guide. To know that you're with the right people, your group, your tribe, a group of people that can nurture or improve this loving. What about reading? There are, just like there are a lot of people, there are a lot of books. There are a lot of materials out there. The internet is chock full of many things, that can teach us anything from how to love or how to care to, unfortunately, being hateful and angry. How do you know you're learning from the right materials? You're learning from the right stuff. Maybe more specifically, that can boil down to asking you, what sort of books do you read?
Yeah, if you're familiar with Rumi, I listened to the poem read by Hollywood star, for instance, Madonna, and of course, Deepak Chopra is also reading Rumi's poem. Those ancient poems of Rumi talks about love, and the book of Mary Oliver. She speaks about nature, about everything, even non-living things. This has life for her, and that's love for me. There's a new, I heard of, there's another popular, I forget his name, but the premise there, the one part I read about is like he mentioned about the here and now. If you find that here and now, and then there's love in that here and now. So these are inspirations from
Beautiful.
me. Yeah.
We will certainly look through all that material. That's quite a number
Mary
of them.
Oliver.
There you go.
Yeah.
And there's Deepak Chopra too,
Yeah.
right? So there's Rumi, there's Mary Oliver,
and
Deepak
Chopra.
Chopra.
Yeah.
We'll check out those materials so that we can be just as loving as you are, learning from them.
And of course, don't forget about the monk by the name of Thich Nhat Hanh. He is really an inspiration.
Yes, he is a personal champion of mine.
Yeah.
Wonderful. A lot of homework that we can take upon ourselves to become more loving persons. And about the self, this is another source of loving, going back to the self, you said. I want to pick up something you have said before, besides intuition and all these wonderful, great works from these thinkers and these lovers. And that will be what you said about anchoring in the here and now, right? I wonder whether you would say that's an important thing to do when you are doing that inner work. How important is grounding yourself in the present moment?
Very important, because like I start with like when, for instance, I have a particular concern in the here and now, and then I tell myself, go back to breathing, inhale, exhale. I think that's feeling the here and now, acknowledging that I am in this present moment, feeling this anger, probably anger, not just happiness but anger, because we cannot separate anger and happiness and love. These are all actual emotions. These are all realities for me, and I think for everyone also who are there, like watching over us. So when I go back to the here and now, then I become attuned to my breathing. I become attuned to the sensation that I am feeling right now. And then I forget about like being angry for a moment, and then go back to that state of being angry again, and go back to the here and now, and slowly let go. That's how I go back to myself.
That's very interesting. The one thing I found most interesting in what you said was this acceptance of a fusion of experiences. When you were talking about how these emotions or how these feelings are so interconnected or so intertwined, you can't set them apart.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, they're one thing, they're a fusion. I found that interesting because so much in our time, I think expresses not just loving, but also hate, racism, discrimination, stereotyping, and it's not just members of ethnic minorities, but also very important to us, very dear to us, mental health workers, the experiences of discrimination and stigmatization that people with mental health problems experience or go through on a daily basis. I wonder how you think this loving, especially this acceptance of even our anger, even the darker, the more burdensome parts of our emotional life, how can that help in opening up communities, groups, families, and individuals to patients, clients, individuals who will tell us that I'm suffering. This opening up, this acceptance of these complicated emotions, I wonder how we can use that so that we can be more accepting, more loving of people with mental health difficulties.
Well, in my experience, like based from the community activities that I am like facilitating from time to time, I simply like have them express themselves. If they're angry, for instance, of course they can be angry. For sure, it is not for a long period of time. In that very moment they feel such, I let them be, rather than telling them, stop, that is not good. Then, if I'm going to do that, there's no more acceptance. There's already labeling, and which is not so good to experience. For instance, in the case of the participant or in the case of the person concerned.
I remember the term radical acceptance.
Yeah.
And I believe this to me is what you're saying. It's an important thing to combat discrimination and stigmatization by making sure that we're accepting not just our feelings, but that we're also supporting others to be able to accept theirs, whatever those feelings are,
Yes.
whether they're tender and affectionate, like feelings of love, or whether they are destructive, whether they are feelings that are pointed and hurtful, like anger, potentially hurtful. There's another saying that's coming to my mind when I heard you say this, Rose, and that's I'm not a fighter, I'm a lover, or I'm a lover, not a fighter, right? There seems to be this counterforce against all this hate and against all this discrimination. We know now that there's a lot of things going on in the world that speaks of hatred and rage and violence. Revenge. Among them, I think greatest among them would be the conflict in Ukraine. In the Ukraine.
Yeah.
Even up to now, while we are looking at the devastation of neighboring countries like Turkey and Syria after the earthquakes there. So there's so much destruction, there's so much anger, so much violence, even in a time when so much love is needed to take care of people who've been wounded, lost everything. A war is going on right next to these countries. Speaking about relevance, Rose, and speaking about how we can continue sustaining, I think love can be difficult to sustain. Maybe loving for a moment, loving for a minute.
Yeah, loving for a moment and for a minute in that particular experience that we're talking about, like war, in the middle of war. I think loving for a moment, or it's a form of, or it's a kind of a dream.
Yes, it can seem like a dream. And it can be very intoxicating.
Yeah, exactly.
I can think of two partners in love and making love, for example. That is a moment of heightened emotion and tenderness.
Ecstatic emotion.
Right. Something that can certainly make people feel very energetic and exciting. However, there's also the challenge of bringing the same love across time.
Yeah.
In other words, I want to hear from you as a way of closing our conversation today about love. I want to hear how does one endure love in the loving. I think of caregivers, those who are taking care of people with chronic mental health issues, people with psychosis, people with long-term schizophrenia, people who are dealing with neurological impairments such as Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's. It's difficult to be loving all the time. As someone who has shown so much love and who has kept herself loving and loving and loving, what would you suggest to bleeding hearts out there so that we can all continue to love?
Yeah, number one, that's very raw. That's kind of surprising, and it's very for me, it's sort of imagination in a way when we share so much love. For instance, to the carers, caring to those especially those who are like with Alzheimer. When people think about it as like hopeless, then you cannot do anything about it. In my case, well, I have to consider my limitations also. I will not be like, it's not stupid, but I will not be like, I'm true to myself and I tell it's okay, I can extend so much love. No, I also have my limitations. What will I do is like, up to the last stretch, if I can do that better. If not, I will try to find another way. But I am not exempted from carrying fatigue,
That is something that has taken a lot of consideration from many scholars of this caregiver fatigue, this burnout that we speak of. This certainly happens when we give so much of ourselves. And Rose has reminded all of us, especially those who are caring for the mentally challenged, those who have mental disabilities. We're talking about special education needs even. Children with Down syndrome, children with ADHD. It's not a moment of loving. It's not one day of loving, but it's every day of trying to be patient and trying to be caring. And in order to stretch that, Rose has encouraged all of us to acknowledge our own limitations, acknowledge our own constraints. And in acknowledging that, perhaps we will be able to find other sources, other ways of loving. And those other ways, Rose has also spoken about. Those other ways, in fact, she has been telling us, read Rumi. If you're out of love, read Deepak Chopra, read Thich Nhat Hanh, read Mary Oliver. Right. Listen to the self, go back to the self, ground yourself in the here and now. You also spoke about breathing, right? These are all sources of love, so that our love remains as fresh and as vibrant as ever. In this episode, we've heard our good friend Rose speak to us about the change-making effects of love, the positive outcomes, the improved quality of life, better mood, better performance at work, feeling more connected. She's spoken to us about the relevance of love in psychology, especially in this time of so much devastation. Our episode also goes out to all our listeners, all our viewers, especially to those who have friends and family in Turkey and Syria. We're sending all our love to you as well. And more importantly, Rose has given us particular ways we can keep our love going. We can sustain and endure in the loving, however hard it becomes. Thank you very much, Rose, for the time you've spent with us. Thank you for teaching us about love, being our love guru this
momentarily.
day. And thank you also to all those who have tuned in to this podcast. Until the next time, see you, and never give up on the loving. This has been Mary Rose Velasco, our guest for today, our lovely guest for today, and Robby Echavez, your humble host. See you again in this next episode of At the Core. Yes.
Love.
It's